This is a Reason live stream with Zach Weissmuller, my colleague. And we're talking to Michael Heise, the founder and supreme commander of the Mises Caucus, the segment of the Libertarian Party, which took over control of the party last, whatever it was, May, June, at the Reno convention, at the Reno reset. He also runs the Mises PAC, which is a political action coalition. Michael, I guess let's start off with talking about the Decentralized REVOLution document the Mises Caucus dropped earlier this year, Project Decentralized REVOLution for a new Libertarian Party. I hear echoes of Murray Rothbard's For a New Liberty in that title. But give us the what's the elevator pitch? What is Project Decentralized REVOLution?
So echoes of Murray Rothbard as well as Ron Paul with the revolution there. But yeah. So the elevator pitch is the point of the takeover was always to develop a political strategy in the long term for the political party that is the LP. And to this point, I don't think there has been a cohesive strategy for as long as I can remember, as long as I can tell. I think there's just kind of been this, well, we just want to run candidates. We just want to get ballot access and nothing that kind of is sustainable in the long term. And so the effect of that has been to kind of spin our wheels for a while. And there's a lot of people who have done a lot of good work, but we've got to develop something in the long term. And something that takes stock of where we're at within political reality right now as a third party and what's realistic for us and attainable for us, and use that as a foundation to build into the future 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years.
Yeah. What's the core essence? Because it's true. It's a long range strategy document. But what's kind of at the core of the strategy?
Well, again, the beginning of the document is a lot about kind of accepting maybe some bitter truths, and shooting for the top is not helping us. And it's not helping us to earn trust. And the concept of trust is something that is repeated over and over again in that document. And so basically what we're saying is we should shoot locally. But when I say locally, it's just the same as I said in our first interview at Reno. We got to shoot for city council. We got to shoot for mayor, sheriff, judge, school board, seats that are able to do something about our problem with the federal government today, that also put us in the mix in the culture at the local level. Because what I believe is that, we're being trained to believe that culture is something that is dictated from the top down because of the fact that the political left and the progressives have essentially taken over the institutions of the country, and they're using those institutions to push ideology through culture. And I don't think that's organic in any sense. I think culture is something that emerges naturally from the individual through the family and through the community. So in a very real sense, if we say, okay, we're going to take it to this community level, the culture is what we're mixing it up with in real time. And at the same time, that local level is where Americans at large perceive the political stakes to be the lowest, and therefore most likely to maybe listen to us, and not at the highest level where they perceive the stakes to be the highest, where they don't believe that we're going to win. So we've got to kind of meet people where they're at.
It's a lot easier to get somebody to vote for a libertarian dog catcher or even tax assessor at the county level than a president.
Again, city council. I don't care about dog catcher. I don't care about things that can't materially change our position with the federal government.
I want to dig a little bit more into the strategy for winning local elections and how you plan to select what kind of elections to run for. But I want to back up for a second to something else you said about accepting the political reality, because that's kind of how this document opens. And I'm just going to read from this a bit at length and get you to expand on one of the ideas here. This is a section called Accepting Political Realities. We must accept certain realities about the political landscape in the United States and where third parties are within that landscape. Some of this may be bitter medicine, as you said, but it's crucial that we get real with ourselves. The ruling class, with its allies in the corporate media and academia, waged a subtle divide and conquer campaign against the American people in the last century or so, and it has largely succeeded. The electorate has been conditioned to identify with either Team Red or Team Blue and to take part in fierce political debate and life or death battle with a very constricted range of opinions and topics, which is sometimes called the Overton window. And you go on that this team mentality is not merely political, it's psychological and emotional. And to leave one's team, which is what libertarians are asking people to do, is to leave one's social circle and status. It's a significant price to pay, and we have to have a compelling reason to ask people to make that sacrifice. So I guess my opening question off of that is, what are the immediate steps that you're taking, or how does that integrate into your strategy to break people out of that very ingrained red-blue mentality? What are the compelling reasons that the new Libertarian Party plans to put forth?
So it's a multitude of things. Like I first stated, kind of tamping down our ambition about where we're actually going to win. I think that's a big part of it, because then we can kind of come to people where they're at and where they're willing to maybe make a change, whereas they won't be at the federal level or something like that. And then other than that, we've also got to meet them where they're at on the issues that are of overlap with us. Because in my opinion, the name of the game is trust. We have to earn trust. And this is something that is a little bit more psychological than how we talk about ideas and how we want to advance our ideas. And how people are going to accept ideas is determined by what you might call their psychic environment or their social environment. And you have to pierce through all of that. So what I'm saying is, there is a lot of distrust in politicians right now. There's a lot of people on the political left who are not getting what they want from their political class. There's a lot of rank and file on the political right who are not getting what they want on their political class. And so we can exploit those gaps and come in on the issues and basically push the political right, the actual politicians with their rank and file behind us to actually pass gun sanctuary legislation at the local level or at the county level, or drug decriminalization if you live in a left area and all of that kind of stuff. And this goes to both create liberty in the locality that you're in, give you street credit, because maybe they still think of the Libertarian Party as a joke, but now they see you personally as a doer, and you've achieved something that they want. I fundamentally don't think in some sense that we can even have the conversations really in good faith until there's a level of trust because of this team environment. The social environment of it is to, not listen to us until we either A, are a threat to them, B, can help them destroy their enemies, or C, create trust. And we just don't have the political capital to be a direct threat or a direct aid to helping them destroy their enemies. So we've got to figure out how to generate trust.
What's the timeline on this?
Oh God, this is going to be multiple decades long, and that's you can get elected into a city council today, but the idea is that, as I stated in the article, that liberty is going to have to be successful as a cultural movement before it could ever be hope to be successful as a political movement. And that takes time, and it takes kind of the seeds that we're planting at the local level to flower over time and collectively shift that culture to where we can make bigger changes down the line. This is something that the progressives have been doing for 100 years. And so, it could take that long, but I think at the very least, if we try it out in the 5-year and start to see progress, we would therefore have the emotional fuel and the proof of concept that we need to see what happens in the next 5 years and the next 5 years, tweaking along the way as we need to, and new data and new experiences come in. But the shooting for the top thing is not working. And again, it's not generating trust, because as far as people can tell, they don't interact with the Libertarian Party. They don't see us. They don't see us in their communities. They just see us come up every 2-4 years or whatever in their presidential races, in their Senate races, and fuck up their candidates and stuff like that, and then to disappear back into the ether again, only to reemerge 2-4 years later. That's not a trust building exercise.
Just a real quick note: you had mentioned the document is attributed to Aaron Harris. Who is Aaron Harris?
So he is our communications director. Okay. It was a collaborative effort between myself, Aaron Harris, and David Hines. They helped me editorialize it.
Thanks. I was just curious. Zach?
So the way that it seems like you want to get libertarians to gain that trust is to get them into offices that are kind of the low-hanging fruit. It's both like offices that are very local and maybe not a lot of people vote in these elections, but also they are they have kind of levers that can be pulled to actually achieve change. I found this section to be kind of interesting. You said only 9% of the 673 LP candidates were for local office, which is you define as lower than county level, yet all but one of the 22 LP victories were in those local races. And then there's a kind of extrapolation as to if you kind of expanded that strategy, what the numbers might have been. But my question, I guess, from just very mechanical point of view is, what is the plan to identify, how do you go about identifying good offices to run for and good people to run for those offices? Because that seems like really the task of the political party, right?
So the two things there. And one, both of them are outlined in the document. So what I propose is the year one strategy at a state party level is, and this is happening this year in Pennsylvania. This is kind of the prototype, our team here that I'm basing this off of. They went county by county and looked at the municipal elections from the previous time that they had municipal level elections. And essentially what they found was that there was dozens, in our state at least, dozens of city councilors and mayors that won where the entire race had less than 50 votes. Not just one candidate, the entire race had less than 50 votes. So you can then set your sights in on those and say, okay, this is the absolute lowest hanging fruit of positions that actually matter, and start to then send out mailers and recruitment efforts and membership drives towards those areas to get people to run. And then what I kind of tie in there is that, again, because the political part because the Libertarian Party has not really had a political strategy, they don't really have anything to inform their fundraising strategy. And if you don't have anything that does either of those, you don't really have a recruitment strategy. The recruitment strategy is, well, our ideas are awesome, and that's all well and good, but we need to have an avenue to make those ideas win in order for people to have, the psychic motivation to do the drudgery that this is going to require. So by having an actual political strategy, you can then ask for money on the basis of that strategy to get the tools needed to maximally do that strategy, which then allows you to go out to, say, all of these registered libertarians who are not in the party, or at least the ones that vote regularly, and say, listen, we're getting our shit together. We have an actual strategy. It's different now. We want you in. We can hook you up with tools. We can get you experience helping these candidates, yada, yada, get them into the community. And then once the community element takes hold, that's the other thing. The community element is crucial to all of this. I don't think any strategy will work without a comprehensive community element from which a culture of liberty can emerge.
What do you mean by that? What's the community strategy?
Well, it goes back to this idea that we're going to have to be successful as a cultural movement. And outside of the presidential elections, you don't see events. Like look at the Tom Woods 2000 episode event. There was 2,000 people at that event. That's bigger that's bigger than any presidential campaign I can think of within the LP and their events. We've got to do things to bring people together and get them connecting and getting our creatives together, supporting our entrepreneurs. And that's what I mean. Like, we have to bring the people together and then start supporting each other in our projects, whether we're doing political based projects or not. And then a culture and our creatives, our artists, all of this stuff, so that a culture of liberty can emerge. Because again, this isn't just political and ideas. We have to offer something in the social realm for people if they're going to leave their old social circles. We have to have a robust community. So if we have that robust community, when we invite people in, it's not just bickering and fighting and 8 people at a meeting and all of this stuff that's kind of characterized the LP experience to this point. It's, we have a strategy, we have a community, we have a reason for you to do the kind of work that we're asking you to do in the long term.
Just to get real specific about the political strategy, because obviously the Libertarian Party has run local candidates for a long time. What would be different here? Is it it seems like you're saying it's the state affiliates are the ones that would be really the ones employing this strategy. It's not like the national party is suddenly funding, city council races. If I'm understanding you correctly, it's the state's chapter would be funding these really local races. Is that fundamentally different than how things have worked in the past?
I don't think there's been a focus on it. I think there's just been we want people to run, man. So like, do what you want. instead of like this focus of, well, we've got a campaign and we've got these tools and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And we've got volunteers and we're aiming at these races. Because a lot of times people come in, there's a lack of infrastructure and a lack of experience. So when people come in, they have no direction. And as much as, you know, like we are individualists and all of that, people do need leaders. And I don't mean political leaders. I mean competence leaders. You know, like and so people do look to leaders to tell them, to help guide them in a direction. So we have to have that in place for people too, not just say, hey, you know, come in and run for whatever race and you're definitely not going to win and, you know, just do it of your own device. It's like, no, we've got an infrastructure in place. It's aimed at these races. And for this goal, are you with us?
And then what is the role of the state level offices? Because you do mention that it's not that you're going to abandon running for senator or governor and so forth, but that it's going to be really targeted. So how do you decide what to do at the state level?
In my opinion, the state level is like a microcosm of running for president. They are essentially marketing and recruitment campaigns, and they should be used to maximize the other efforts that are built around actually gaining political capital, whether that be city councilor and all of that. So, you know, they're the ones who have perhaps the widest microphone. You know, we had several Senate candidates and governor candidates this year who were able to get into the debates. So those are the people who have perhaps the best opportunity within their state to drive the messaging, drive the recruitment, and give a vision of what it means to be a libertarian and what our culture is like, to then drive people towards us. And once they're towards us, we have our shit together, we have a strategy, we have tools. Now there's an actual reason beyond just, well, we have ideas. So it's to work synchronistically around the local strategy.
Okay. But you would be much more selective in who kind of gets backing to run at the state level. Is that accurate?
I mean, in theory, that's up to the state level. But if I had to suggest, I would say, yeah, you're going to need a strong messenger. You're going to need somebody with charisma. You're going to need somebody who has some gravitas to them. Maybe a business owner or somebody who people can respect and take seriously when they put this message forward. Because again, we're not winning the race. We're not. So we can't compel people on those grounds. We have to compel them on different grounds at that level of race.
So, I mean, at in the past midterms, there was the race that got the most attention was in Georgia because the candidate there, Chase Oliver, forced a runoff. What was your and I talked to Chase Oliver a little bit before this, and I see he's watching as well. We might bring up a couple of his comments. He said he didn't really get a lot of backing from the national LP until he was kind of already making a splash. What was your evaluation of the kind of campaign Chase ran? Is that the sort of thing you would want to see in the future?
I think he had some great moments in the debates. You know, I think when he's pointing out they don't read the bills, what he's trying to tap into there is that these people don't have your interests at heart. They're not representing you. They're not serving you. And I don't know if he would word it this way, but that's essentially a populist message. Tapping into how the little guy is being screwed over by the big guy. And I think that's great. And I actually publicly, congratulated him on his getting the runoff and getting the attention from stuff like that. So I do think that we need to go in that direction. I do think populism is something that we do need to employ. I don't think populism is I think it's a tool. It's not an end of itself. There's a reason why Bernie Sanders, who is on the political left, is a populist, but also so is Trump. Like, populism isn't something in and of itself.
Ron Paul.
I thought he employed a libertarian populist message. Yeah, I think "End the Fed" is very populist. It's you're the little guy. Maybe you're of modest means. Maybe you're concerned about how you're going to afford the groceries next week, and that's all being screwed up by this banking elite that doesn't have your interest at heart. I think we have to go in that direction.
To push a little bit on the populist issue in relation to Chase Oliver's campaign too. What was different about him is that he also pushed for very strongly for kind of protection of minority rights, whether they're ethnic or sexual or racial minorities, which cuts against the populist message. Was that a big part of his appeal as well?
It's hard to say.
And it's certainly libertarian, right? Because it's like, hey, we're all individuals and we get to kind of live how we want as long as we're not, really getting in the face of other people.
And then just let me add one little bit of context here, because I have some of the results from that Georgia race. So up on the top there, you see Chase Oliver, kind of that he's the one that covered the spread there, got about 81,000 running for Senate. Then in the governor's race, there was Shane Hazel, who I think you would agree is more the Mises Caucus mold candidate.
Yeah. He was actually mentioned in the Decentralized Decentralized REVOLution document and forced to run off 2 years ago. So was actually in a very similar situation.
And so he got about 28,000. And then the lieutenant governor, Ryan Graham candidate, got about 85,000. What do those results mean, if anything, to you in the context of Nick's question?
So again, I put this in the article, and this might be one of those hard pills for people to swallow. I, honest to God, am starting to truly believe that our vote results at this level of race is not primarily driven by our own. I don't think we have the level of control over the vote totals that we get at this level of race as we might like to think. Because Shane forced the runoff. He has a different style of messaging than Chase. So like, how do you account for that in just 2 years? Fundamentally, we're arguing the difference between 1% or 3%, which again, in the long term, you're not building political capital. What's the real difference here? I'm a reach the remnant guy. If you reach 1% or 3% electorally, that doesn't matter. But if 1,000 of those people really get it and then come in, that's what matters. So
can I ask,
I would judge the results off of something like that.
Yeah. So that goes to Chase has put a question in our comment section saying, how do we get our name out there if we aren't competing in the highest profile races? Higher profile is meant to help down ballot. So, I mean, in a way, aren't you making an argument that, you're going to reach the remnant, or you have a bigger chance of reaching the remnant, not just in Georgia, but across the country, if you end up becoming a spoiler?
I don't mind being a spoiler. And I think when those opportunities come up, we have to narratively run with that as, okay, we're a political threat. And I'm not suggesting that we don't compete. I mean, we're talking, Zach, you had said yourself about how we're not abandoning that. What I'm saying is that the reality is we're not competitive. We might be in the race, but we're not competitive. And people know that. Like nobody is fooled by this and thinks, I think the Libertarians got a real chance this year. I could see all these Libertarian elected state house members and blah, blah, blah. Like this is one of the areas where we got to get real about ourselves and figure out what's causing people to vote for this level of race and tap into that. Because if we don't have control of it, then maybe it's just discuss, Let
me bring up one other question here from Chase while we're talking about him and also the state level issue. He mentions nationally we had the Frontier Project that helped us elect our first state legislator in a generation. That was in Wyoming, I believe. Marshall Burt, I think was his name, and he did not win re-election. Some Libertarian Party regulars see that as a big failure because this is the one state legislator that the Libertarian Party had in the whole country, and now with this new strategy, kind of that the wind has been taken out of those sails. Is that a problem?
Well, first of all, the Mises PAC had given thousands of dollars to the Frontier Project. I appreciate their use of data and their use of targeting to be as realistic as possible at that level of race. So we had given thousands of dollars to the Frontier Project directly, and we had also, I feel bad, I forget her name, the other woman that ran in Wyoming that lost by a tiny bit, we donated to her directly as well. However, he did not win re-election. And he won that race when it was him versus a Democrat. And then when the Republicans put somebody up for the first time in something like 15, 20 years, he lost and lost by a wide margin, despite the fact that he was already elected and had that kind of name recognition. So again, I just don't think that we have the trust at that level of race, and we have got to get serious and real with ourselves about building from the ground up. We have to, there's no narrative around us. What is the grand narrative from people who are not already libertarians about libertarians? That's up to us to craft in their minds because we haven't done it.
What should it be?
So I kind of made a post about this. In my opinion, the most basic way of describing it is I would say that we don't have any political voice in this country that is about free markets, about the individual, about free speech, property, and all of these kind of core to our founding ideas. We have two flavors of progressivism. Progressivism in this context meaning people who think that the state can solve problems and make you a better person in some sense. You know, you have left progressives that think they can make you more equal and less bigoted. You've got right progressives that think they can make you more the state can make you more responsible and more moral. And meanwhile, the whole paradigm, the entire Overton window, as touched in that, is progressive. And so we have to challenge that.
So can I ask, I mean, I agree with that, but I already agree. You know, I'm a libertarian. So like, you know, the Republican Party doesn't agree with that. And the Republican Party has, you know, effectively 50% market share, along with 50% for the Democrats. We're not progressives. If you ask, you know, Marjorie Taylor, if you ask Donald Trump, if you ask Lauren Boebert, if you ask the, you know, the members of the Republican Party who just, you know, the rump group that essentially forced Kevin McCarthy to do their bidding if he were to become speaker, they're not defining themselves as progressive, and nobody in the mainstream media is defining them as progressive. The only people who are libertarians, and that includes everybody from the Cato Institute to Reason to the Mises Caucus to the Mises Institute to the LP. How do you measure the effectiveness, not of what you're saying or the internal consistency, but how will you see it actually changing people's minds?
We have to connect the dots, because at the end of the day, we have to tell the truth. That's what has to be at the core of it. It can't just be ideology for ideology's sake. We have to tell the truth. And if the truth is that they're a flavor of progressivism, then we have to run with that. So then the question is how do we connect the dots? And I think you have to hit both sides from different ways. I mean, yes, you have to hit the left from the left and hit the right from the right. But even deeper than that, I would argue that the left side of the paradigm opposes libertarianism on what you might call a first principle basis. I think they actually oppose in large part property rights, and they agree with the collective over the individual. The problem with the right side of it is that they're full of shit. They claim to be for liberty in some sense and liberty principles, but then they're protectionists, and then they want their Trump checks and all of this. So we've got to hit them on their own terms and connect the dots while politically building the trust to make to be able to open that conversation. But it all comes together.
In a significant way, I mean, your political strategy is not about the grand narrative. Your political strategy is going into towns, towns and cities at the council level, at the sub-county level, and saying, hey, we're not Republicans or Democrats. We're not Team Red or Team Blue here. What we are is we have a problem with crime. We have a problem with garbage collection. We have a problem with really shitty zoning. With onerous drug laws and things like that, and we're going to elect people who are who happen to be libertarian, but you Democrat, you Republican, will want to work with in order to make your little town better.
Yeah, I would say that's the building political capital part of the strategy. That's the other reason why you have to have your statewides and your president. You do have to have somebody to kind of craft that grand narrative, because that's going to reach the remnant. But once you reach that remnant and they come in, you got to funnel it into something that's actually viable. Otherwise, they're going to burn out. They're going to not see the point of all of this, and then they're going to leave and either go apolitical or go back to one of these other parties or whatever. So we have to excite people about the ideas, and then with that excitement, drive them down into viable activity in the long term.
I'm going to bring up a couple comments here that I think will allow us to dig a little bit more into something you mentioned about progressives versus the right, and the likelihood that libertarians are going to reach one side or another. I'm going to hit you with a little bit of sugar and then something a little bitter after that. First, this is David versus Goliath, who says the LPMC is the best thing to happen to the Libertarian Party since David Nolan's living room. Then we've got someone named the Mechanic is here saying the Mises Caucus is purely conservative scum who oppose everything that libertarianism is about. So quite a bit of polarization and opinion here. And with regard to the charge that you are really a bunch of conservatives or a bunch of right wingers, is that is that, how accurate is that? Because you do definitely say that, you know, the progressives are the problem, but do you have a fundamental critique of kind of what's ascended on the right, like what I'll call the national conservatives, the NatCons? That's what's ascended in the Republican Party. Is there a problem with that, or are you trying to actually draw from that and say we are actually the more right-wing party than the Republicans are?
Well, we have to draw from wherever we can. But as far as like the political right, I actually think, call it what you want. Call it the dissident right. Call it the new America, or the America First right. I think that's who we have to be having the arguments with primarily right now. I think we're in competition with the right in a way that we're not with the left. And again, it goes back to this point where the left has basically already run the culture war. They've already done their war march through the institutions. They're already, you know, bombarding us from Hollywood and pop culture and all of this stuff. They've already won that. So then the question is what do we do about that? And we are in competition with this new right, or whatever you want to call it, on how to push back with that. So I actually think we have to open up the debates and the arguments and the fights with the right in higher priority. Because again, I think they are trying to speak our language. They're trying to say that we're liberty people, but we know that, you know, they're protectionists. We know that they have not been good on war and all of these other things. So we've got to do battle with them to reclaim the narrative on what to do with the fact that the culture war has already been won. Whereas with the left, that's a lot easier for us to be working against, because again, I think they oppose us on a first principle basis. I think they oppose us on property rights. They're not really making that argument. The right is, and that's why we have to kind of do narrative battle with them, I think, in a way that we don't with the left.
Okay, but what about what you said earlier about the right's assumption that the state is going to enforce morality? Because that really seems to be what's heating up now. You know, if in the broad, what we call culture wars, like it's about, you know, how far should a governor or a mayor go in kind of trying to advance a certain view of morality? Where does the Mises Caucus fall on that? And like what's like, how does it see the Libertarian Party, you know, aligning in those cases?
I think we need organic leaders. Again, leaders of competence, not political. So no one's saying like, you know, take the sex surgery stuff for kids. You know, like we need to have our own leaders who are outside of politics that we elevate, who have a strong voice and can speak from a place of strength. You don't have to be a conservative to see a problem with the trans kids issue and you know, sex surgeries for kids who aren't even allowed to join the military and this kind of thing. But is anyone saying that, oh, the state is the proper role for what is or is not moral? No. And again, I think this is something where libertarians kind of blur lines a little bit. We tend to take libertarianism and make it out to be a full-scale worldview when it's not. It's a political and legal theory, and there's a lot of aspects of life that are outside of those things that we have free reign to operate in. So we got to be on the right side of that. I think we do have to pitch a better story that makes a stronger society.
Why
embrace responsibility, basically.
I guess so. And I think this is going to what Zach was talking about in some of the comments. You know, if you want a politician who is saying no to, and you know, to sex reassignment surgery, for gender reassignment surgery for minors, you've already got that. That's what the Republican Party is. You know, they're going whole hog on that. So how does that, in somebody like Ron DeSantis, who seems to be conservative, who seems to be, you know, he does say that he wants the state to be an instrument of moral instruction. But he's also not a progressive. He's not a conservative. Like, I'm trying to get a sense of how do you separate from somebody like that from a Mises Caucus point of view?
Well, I think what's happening within libertarian circles right now is you kind of have this narrative of, you know, there's a conversation that's happening where, like, traditionally we'll say the left and the right are the exact same thing, and right now the left is dominating, so that has to go by the wayside, and you know, we have to deal with what's in front of us, and the left is clearly worse. And on one hand, I can see where they're coming from, like, because frankly the right is better than the left right now in terms of the culture war. And like I said in the document, that's really the only thing that's separating the political parties anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that libertarians ought to advocate government intrusion into the culture war. But I think, again, what is the proper role for people to engage in the culture war? I think it's example. I think it's leadership. I think it's taking responsibility. I think it's the same thing that we ought to be doing with foreign policy, where we can offer diplomacy, we can offer advice, we can live the best that we can, we can take responsibility for ourselves and encourage that throughout society. So I don't. What's up?
Yeah, well, I guess what I was also trying to get at is that, is there a role for the Libertarian Party to offer a, you say that, there's no kind of cultural, or let's say, libertarianism is not about dictating what kind of someone's personal morality is. So there can be conservative libertarians, there can be more progressive or socially liberal, I guess, libertarians. But it really comes down to what is the role of the state in enforcing morality. And, the kind of thrust of the Libertarian Party now is going against wokeness, right? And so is there a line that the Libertarian Party can draw, or a critique that the Libertarian Party can make of the right on this? Because Nick brought up DeSantis before, and DeSantis is very aggressively going into educational institutions and kind of dictating, what is proper and improper to be taught. And so
at both the K through 12, and he attempted at the at higher education as well.
He didn't just attempt it at higher education. It is happening in higher education. It's being challenged in the courts now. But is there a hard line that the Libertarian Party should be drawing there and saying, yeah, maybe a lot of us are against some of these excesses, or we think that, surgery for minors is wrong, but there is a line that can be crossed in terms of the state trying to enforce a conservative worldview.
Yeah, but I don't see them advocating the state on things outside of violence. I don't see them that. I think even most anarchists would say that within political reality, it's okay to default to minarchism in practical reality, and again, this boils down to, what does practical reality look like for libertarians if we were engaged in it? So let me give you a thought experiment as a hypothetical. Let's say somehow you had libertarians, enough libertarians in Congress, right, where, there's enough of us to influence policy, but we can't abolish the Department of Education. We can't get that full separation of church and state. And a bill comes up that says, hey, we're either going to have economics in one lesson in the schools, or we're going to have some critical race theory book. Are you doing a no vote? Are you doing a present?
Why would
I'm voting for economic, huh?
Yeah. I don't understand though, that question. That's a great thought experiment and everything, but what it comes down to is, we are advocating for, I would assume, a school system where individuals have maximum choice to go to schools.
Right. You always aim for that. You always agitate towards that. You always argue to that. And
so does that mean, in a Florida context, you are comfortable with the state saying, here is a list of ideas and concepts that are absolutely forbidden to be taught in public schools?
I'm saying, if I can't get the ideal, I will take better.
I know, but is that the better? Because that's the real life situation now, where in Florida and a number of other states, you have governors saying these concepts, these lists of words, sometimes particular books, cannot be taught in public schools.
That's what a curriculum is. A curriculum is, we're teaching these books and nothing else. You know what I mean? So
that's making it illegal. No, it's not necessarily nothing else. I'm saying, under DeSantis's law, even charter schools would not be allowed to do, to participate in.
Oh, no. I wholesale. Yeah, no, wholesale like that. No. But again, if I was in a board or whatever that decided curriculum, and I couldn't get the full abolition of state and education, then I'm going for economics and one less.
I accept that, Michael. And you're kind of asking, if your choice is between Florida or California schools, what are you going to do? Because they're both kind of being shaped by the government. And I've made my choice, but at the same time, I do think there's value in the Libertarian Party being the party that reframes these things and says, this is not really the correct lens.
I agree with that.
looking at things through. Like we
And that
should
does
not be all like forced into a one size fits all system.
Yeah,
So.
or to, I mean, aren't we, or aren't you, by participating in the culture war, the Libertarian Party saying we're going after wokeness? Wokeness is the enemy. This is a culture war phenomenon. I mean, you know, what if they gave a culture war and the Libertarian Party or the Mises Caucus didn't come? You know, and instead of playing that game where it's easy to be mistaken for, you know, if the old joke was that libertarians were Republicans who smoked pot, now it's maybe libertarians or Republicans who do shrooms. But, you know, like, you know, where, you know, who is talking about actually, you know, balancing the budget, who is talking about policy as opposed to these hot button issues? And it seems in many ways the Mises Caucus takeover of the Libertarian Party has coincided with saying, you know what, we're not talking about abortion because it's too complicated. We're not talking about this. We're not talking about that. But like, you've actually abdicated some policy questions there.
So again, I think the role of the LP is you have to agitate and argue towards the ideal. And so I think we have done a lot on war. I mean, the party is on several issues. I think they are talking about inflation. They are talking about the Fed. They are talking about war. They're throwing a coalition anti-war rally at, and people can go to rageagainstwar.com and check that out. So I think they are doing that, but I think peppered into that, we have to find our lanes to get into the zeitgeist essentially. And so I think the hot button issues is how you can do that. How do we enter the conversation if they're not inviting us to the conversation? We have to force our way in.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And I guess, but then my question is, if you enter the trans debates, which are, you know, so overheated for the number of people who are affected by it and the sides, like I know of virtually no people who say that, you know, the state or, you know, that underage children should have absolute right to gender reassignment surgery against their parents' wishes. But if you're entering these debates on the team of somebody who's already kinds of owns that issue, I think you risk confusing the libertarian identity with a Republican identity in this case.
Right. But again, we have to be truth-based. You know, what if it's both true that the political right is narratively better on this issue, and also true that Biden ended the war in Afghanistan in foreign policy that makes him better than Trump? Like, what if that's just true?
Yep. What about it? I mean,
I think just to make a little bit of a pivot here to bring it back to the policies that are outlined in this document, as a little bit of a palate cleanser, I want to play this montage of clips from Harry Browne, who was the 1996 and 2000 Libertarian candidate for president, and he had
Joe Jorgensen was his VP, and I believe 96.
Yep.
And he's mentioned in this document that we're discussing today. So let me just play this montage from Harry Browne, and then get you to talk a little bit about what you think the new Libertarian Party might learn from the old Libertarian Party.
Pardon everyone who has been found guilty of a federal nonviolent gun control offense. I will pardon everyone who has been found guilty on a federal tax evasion charge. I will pardon anyone else who has been convicted of any kind of victimless crime by the federal government. I will end federal affirmative action immediately. I will end all federal quotas, set-asides, preferential treatments, and any other form of discrimination that the federal government is engaged in. I will bring to an end immediately all asset forfeiture cases, and I will take immediate steps to try to apply restitution to anyone who has been victimized by the federal government in the past. As Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, I will immediately bring all American troops back home to America where they belong. I will personally go through and get rid of all the regulations that run up the price of all the things we buy and hold down the wages we earn. And then I will break for lunch.
Okay, so what lessons are you taking from the days of Harry Browne?
So I think the biggest appeal, at least to me personally, is that he's kind of a radical in a suit. Like and it's the same thing with Ron Paul. He's kind of a radical in a suit. And I think there's been, I don't know, like I think there's been a conflation when it comes to this whole radical versus pragmatic debate, that radical necessarily means making a spectacle for the sake of the spectacle. And I don't think that's right. I think you can be a radical in a suit, and I think that's how it kind of punches the hardest. And so I hear that. I think I see that in his presentation. I hear him speaking to pure first principles in his solutions. So I think those are two really strong things for him. And I also think at the time, the Libertarian Party itself, like the leadership of the party itself, was engaged in way better strategy. They were engaged in data sharing with Harry Browne. They were buying data from other organizations as the Harry Browne thing was going on. So they had this high peak of energy around Harry Browne. They were getting data and then using him as the lightning rod to excite people, kind of like what I'm saying, to funnel. And then from there, I don't think they had like the ground game for the local strategy that I'm going to try to use to keep people in the long term. But I think those are all very strong points in his favor.
And just to pull up a little bit of data there, you mentioned in the document, and this is backed up by this data, that you see the spike in the Libertarian Party donors back. That spike is during the Harry Browne years of 1996 through 2000. So that was kind of the high point of the donor numbers. Electorally, Harry Browne did not do particularly well compared to. He did poorly. Yes.
What do you think explains the disconnect, Michael?
Electorally,
same thing with Ron Paul. Yeah, that very first principle oriented, radical in a suit. Why didn't they poll better numbers electorally?
My theory is that, again, I don't think our outcomes at that level are primarily driven by our own efforts. I think they are driven by how disgusted people are with the status quo, one way or the other, and they just can't take it anymore. And I think we have a much higher level of disgust with politics in general and politicians in general today than we did back then. I don't think that's really up for debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, though, in 96, I mean, there was a huge level of disaffection between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. I mean, nobody was excited about that race. And Clinton wasn't even able to win 50% of the vote against the weakest Republican.
We've been going downhill for a long time, I know.
Yeah. No, and in 2000, there was a palpable sense of contempt for Al Gore as well as for George Bush, which also led to neither candidate winning 50%. I'm just curious.
So there's a lot of complicated factors, both at the electoral level. You could also argue at the fact that there was that spike during the Harry Browne years could have had to do with these external factors and not as much to do with Harry Browne, because as Nick just mentioned, Ron Paul ran as a candidate in 1988, pretty hardcore radical guy, and yet the spike did not come until later.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the end of the Cold War, the rise of the internet, the economy taking off in the second half of the 90s all changed things. I mean, the broader cultural context for libertarianism exploded in the 90s for a lot of different reasons, including the rise to visibility of the Cato Institute and Reason. We saw exponential growth, particularly online, as the decade unwound.
So we've talked, local, state. Now, what is the Project Decentralization strategy, or Decentralized REVOLution strategy for at the national level?
It's basically just a macro version of what I've already said about the state level. That is our biggest megaphone opportunity. That is our biggest opportunity to attract people and to get ourselves into the conversation and hopefully expanding that Overton window. Because, like, again, if I'm right, if my theory is right, and people aren't voting for libertarians necessarily because of the candidate itself, it's not necessary. It's more about who you attract more than how many you attract. So what we want is people coming in on the right basis and with the right attitude and with the right level of motivation to actually become members and do this work in the long term by joining our community. So it's the same thing. It's getting as much media attention as possible. But again, I think the term media is a little bit different today than before.
Very different.
You know?
Yeah, very different.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the document. Hold on, I gotta find that. There's something about. Oh yeah, you mentioned that there's a media landscape that actually now favors a radical decentralist approach, where libertarians can have a voice. And then you talk about all the podcasters out there. Someone like Dave Smith, goes on the Joe Rogan Experience, gets millions of views on a clip where he's, talking about the Ukraine intervention. How far do you think that ultimately can be pushed in terms of translating into electoral success? Because, the Joe Rogan Experience is huge. On the other hand, how many Joe Rogan listeners are ultimately going to go and, vote?
How many CNN listeners are going to go and take up cause with us? I mean, what media? If Joe Rogan isn't the fertile environment, or one example of the fertile environment,
sure.
Who exactly is the big whale that we're chasing? Otherwise, what's the point of media?
Maybe it's not. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not media driven. I mean, that's part of the question, right?
But again, we have to have our grand narrative out there. We have to have our grand narrative out there. So to kind of just put context, like numbers context, we could sit here and say, well, maybe Joe Rogan's audience is this or that. Last time I looked, maybe 6 months ago, Tucker Carlson was the biggest news show on cable television at about 3.3 million viewers per episode. Joe Rogan, 12 or 13 million. He's 3 to 4 times bigger than the biggest news show. And again, this is all still emergent. We don't have a podcast that's regularly hitting 50 million downloads. The paradigm is still shifting. That's going to happen. This is all still emergent. Greg Gutfeld, 2.2 million, beating all of the late night comedy shows. And yet that's nothing. I mean, that's probably Tim Pool probably gets more than that, let alone all this other patchwork of people who have 1 million subscribers here, 900,000 subscribers there, so there's a lot there.
Yeah. I basically agree with you that it's the kind of fracturing media landscape is probably a good thing for libertarians.
That's a great thing.
And other outsiders, and there's a lot of opportunities there. My pessimism there is that the debates still seem to be very important. And that's been a big hurdle for the Libertarian Party forever, is getting into those debates. They spent a lot of effort, trying to get past that threshold, and, just falling short with the Gary Johnson campaign. Is that even worth worrying about anymore in your world? Are you saying that's just kind of,
I think we can get around them. I think we can get around them. And because, well, 2 things. One, I have no idea what the debates are even going to look like now, because the Republicans pull it out of the debate commission. That may be a good thing. That may be a bad thing. I don't know what that is going to mean for the debates. Honestly, I don't. Yeah. But I also think that when you have this new media paradigm, what happens when if and when Tim Pool and Joe Rogan and Jimmy Dore or something come together and saying, we're throwing our own debates? That's on the table. That's something that could realistically happen, And I mean, I know in 2016, I forget if it was 16 or 20, Trump at one point even said, yeah, I'll come on Joe Rogan and debate. Now he knew that, I think it was 2020. I think it was Biden. He knew Biden wouldn't do it. But the point of the matter is that you have the already sitting president saying, I'll do that. There's a demand for it.
If I may, though, realistically, when you're talking about media exposure and you're trying to appeal to a remnant, you're looking for people who are going to become party activists primarily at the local level and win races where there might be 50 votes cast in an entire slate of elections.
Year one.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, in a way, because it seems that most political organizers will tell you that, the way that you win elections is by having door knockers and people going out into communities and turning out the vote that way. Can I ask, what have you, is the Mises Caucus working with groups like Young Americans for Liberty or other, groups that are, mostly identified or affiliated with Republican Party candidates, but are they playing ball with you, or what are you doing about that ground game?
So we have runislibertarian.com, and so far we've recruited almost 300 candidates and campaign managers through that funnel, and we're putting on trainings twice a month online. So far, it's been a mix of the Leadership Institute and our own training modules. So, I mean, we're utilizing already established organizations that have a history of doing this stuff, as well as starting to get ourselves off the ground and get the community training the community.
And those modules do things like, this is how you put out a press release. This is how you file for this. This is, how you go, how you have a rally. Things, I mean, basic nuts and bolts type stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, of course you have to have door knockers. I'm just saying that I don't know if door knockers at the presidential level is going to overcome the distrust and the knowledge that they're not going to win, but it might do it at the local level where people are willing to take a chance.
Yeah.
I think, since we're bringing up the local level again, this might be a good moment to bring in this clip, this other clip that I pulled from the Decriminalized Denver movement. This was the initiative to the successful initiative to decriminalize magic mushrooms in Denver, and it's now been decriminalized statewide. But this is something you identify as a kind of model that you want to emulate. So I want you to I want to play this clip and then just react and tell me, what this means from a political strategy standpoint.
It's one of the first 2 U.S. states to legalize recreational cannabis sales, which it did by voter initiative in 2012, putting it on the frontier of American drug policy then and now.
This is the best place in the country to do this right now. Denver and maybe the state of Colorado is in many ways, at least with drug policy, embracing more of this libertarian concept that, as long as I'm not causing harm to self or others, we should have the freedom to use whatever substances we choose and put into our bodies whatever we choose.
Denver's decriminalization initiative makes the possession or use of psilocybin the city's lowest law enforcement priority and prohibits the city from spending resources to impose criminal penalties for the personal use and personal possession of psilocybin mushrooms by persons 21 years of age and older, and also establishes a panel to review the effects of the change in law. It does not legalize commercial sales of mushrooms, leaving a potentially large gray market. Sovine says her experience in cannabis legalization, which progressed from medical to recreational in every state that's legalized it, convinced her that decriminalization rather than medicalization is actually the far more radical and liberatory path to take.
Maybe we want to see doctors being able to prescribe psilocybin, but is that the only way we want to be able to access it? Should we still be going to jail and having it be a criminal offense outside of having a physician prescribe it for you lawfully? I think that the core tenet and the reason why the campaign became what it was today was because we don't necessarily think that going through that process necessarily means access to all patients.
Yeah, so I include that last clip because an interesting aspect of this law is that it was sort of modeled on like sanctuary city laws, where it's really about telling the local law enforcement saying we're just not going to prioritize this. Whatever the federal government or the state laws are, it's just not going to be something we deal with. I wonder, what is that? What do you make of that template, and how can it be applied in other realms? Because I know that that's something that you're interested in.
I think so. Even with my strategy, like I said, we've recruited 300 or ish candidates and campaign managers. We're just not at a political reality yet where libertarians are filling up the ballot, which means there's going to be places where there's not libertarians on the ballot where we need to do something. And I really think the issues is the realm where we're going to create the most trust. And I think that is a good example of that, because Kevin, who is the guy in those clips, is a good friend of mine. We got involved in that effort. And if you remember, that effort passed by the skin of its teeth, the Denver one specifically.
Yep.
And in fact, they pronounced that it did not pass the day of the vote. And then the next day said, oh, it just barely got over the top. Kevin called me after that and was like, thank you, man. Like, we got the Libertarian Party of Colorado to endorse that effort. There was libertarians on that effort. Now there's trust. Now there's trust there. And I can have that conversation. And Kevin is going to be coming to one of our Take Human Action tour events. And so, again, I think issues are probably the fastest way that libertarians can get involved, shift the narrative around an issue, push something forward that normal people want, not necessarily the political class, and build that trust and have the conversation. And I think Kevin, over the course of his experience, has become more libertarian as a result.
Yeah.
So I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I talked to Kevin before this, and he told me, he's a fan of Michael Heise, and that you secured, I guess, the Oregon Party, Libertarian Party endorsement of the initiative. What are when you think about the local offices, there's very specific ones that you mentioned, like city council and sheriff. I think there were maybe a couple others.
Mayor, school board.
Mayor, school board. What are the components? What are the powers that these have that you are hoping that libertarians elected at the local level will be able to use to immediately advance liberty?
So with Denver and like that effort, they're a state that has ballot initiatives available to them, and not every state does. It's like 26, 24, something like that. So in those states that don't have that, you're going to have to go the lobbying route, and you can affect issues that way. But that's also getting elected as a libertarian to city council is how you can do exactly what was done with that ordinance. It's just a different methodology of attaining it. Like, you can push back against your state laws, you can push back against federal laws, and that is the big value there is their ability to nullify the out of control feds. And you can do it with all manner of things. Like, you can do it with essentially anything that's not in Article 1 and Section 8, from drugs to guns to immigration, to even aspects of monetary policy. Like, you see out in Missouri, they're doing a state level initiative to essentially recognize gold and silver as currency. There's all kinds of things that we can do. It's just, we've got to get real about where we can do them, and we're not going to win federal office and do it. But we can do it on a town by town basis while building up our political capital and our trust level with the people at a grassroots level.
At the Mises Caucus website, in the issue campaigns that you mentioned, because you rightly talking about how issues oftentimes are places where a small number of libertarians or any kind of third party or special interest group can really make a big impact. The issue campaigns that are mentioned are abolishing lockdowns, decriminalizing psychedelics and cannabis, and keeping guns free. Are there particular places, either in large cities or at the state level, that are on the, that are in your scope to actually start moving on? So where is the next Denver decriminalization effort that you are actually targeting and looking towards?
There's several methods of figuring that out. I mean, can I tell you town X? Not off the top of my head. But what I can tell you is that, again, it's like I said in our original interview, if you live in a blue town, like a very blue town, and they are not decriminalized, we're at a point right now where people can have their opinions on what happened with the Brittany Griner thing. Oh, they should have done it, they shouldn't have done it. None of that matters, in my opinion. What matters is the fact that they did it gives us as libertarians the opportunity to go and say, to blue towns, and say, your president said that he wanted to pardon federal marijuana convicts and brought this chick home. Why are our people in jail here? And kind of torque them, hit the left from the left. So I think we have to basically go to the blue towns, hit them on issues of overlap that we have with them, and do the same thing on the right. And I would target the reddest towns and the bluest towns respectively to start with, and move down from there, depending on how many people you have in a given town.
I want to go just talk a little bit about results and what success would look like, and then maybe turn to some of the questions, because some interesting questions have come in from the audience. And if you have any other questions, everyone who's watching, now would be a great time to throw some more in. But you said at the end of that interview with Nick something like, "By our fruits you'll know us." So you're saying, like, just look at what happens and you'll see. And, it's still early on, but I want to give everyone context of what has happened since the takeover. This is some data that we were going through. This is just the historic data of donors to the Libertarian Party over 10 years. And the reason I'm pulling this up is just to show an overall pattern. You see these spikes in election years, followed by a decline, and then another spike in 2020 there, and another decline. So that's kind of the historic pattern that is to be expected. Now, this is a closer 12-month look at active donors. And the reason I'm talking about active donors is because this is something Michael has said is what we should judge them by, the intensity and size of the support for the party. So you see that there's a little bit of a decline and then a spike. That spike is right after the Reno convention, when the Mises Caucus kind of took over leadership of the party. And then you see this slow decline, and it's settled down below the level before the takedown. So that doesn't look great. And then we talked a little bit about some of the state seat that was lost. Overall, there's fewer libertarians that are holding elected office now than were before. These are numbers that we will all link below in the show notes. So what do you make of what's transpired so far? What's your explanation for that? And when would be fair for us to kind of judge your efforts and the results of the Reno reset?
So we're about 7 months in, and I think you're seeing a big reconstruction. Essentially, there's been turnover on the staff as the vision of the party has changed. All of that kind of stuff. So there was a big surge of people after, and the party also just posted a financial report, posting its first $2 million a year in the midterm elections in like 20 years or something like that. So you can do a lot of things with data. I can tell you that I've been on the phone all week with entrepreneurs and with influencers who are coming our way. And saying, we have audiences, we have our own businesses, we have, community respect and stuff like that. And I want to take up cause with you and take up cause with the LP. So I think it's analogous to like Twitter, like Musk came in, bunch of employees came out, it looked like there could be issues. Well, now it's like one of the top downloaded apps again, and people have a little bit more faith, although they got to free my boy Scott. And people have more. Yeah, Scott Horton needs to be put back on Twitter. So I think we're in the middle of that reconstruction period. So as far to answer your question, I have always thought that it would be expected that there might be a short-term dip as that reconstruction happens. There are people who are kind of been around in the movement a while who have no idea what happened still. And so, I would ask your audience, if you like what I'm saying, go to lp.org/join, join the party, help them out. And as far as when's fair, 23 is going to be our year one for putting out the political strategy. And then obviously 24 is going to be dominated by the presidential race.
To stick with the by your fruits, you shall know us line. When's the first harvest?
I think this anti-war rally. I mean, when is the last time you saw the Libertarian Party get out in the streets and get out in the community on an issue that we're passionate about?
So, if by the end of the 2024 election cycle, you and the Mises Caucus supervise, leadership of the party hasn't significantly changed things, is it right to say, okay, you guys have failed?
I would have to see the data.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have to see the data.
Nick, do you have any other questions before I turn to some of these audience questions?
Yeah, let's run through the questions, and then let's talk about the curious case of Dr. Ron Paul and Dr. Rand Paul after that. And
okay.
Okay.
So this is a question that's representative of a few that have come in from Silver Sword Studios. Question for Michael. Do you think the rhetoric, or in your words, strong messaging of the Mises Caucus has effectively worked to promote the broader libertarian movement? To what extent, if so?
So, yeah, I really do, actually. Sorry about that. Yeah, I do. So, first of all, in your first video where we did our first interview at Reason, I would encourage people to go to that video and look at the comments. The most liked comments on that whole thing from your guys' audience was, this guy is speaking to exactly why I wasn't in the Libertarian Party. I am hopeful. I'm encouraged. I want to join. And it's just filled to the brim of things like that in there. We have gained, the party has not had the support of the biggest voices of the liberty movement, the Tom Woodses, the Scott Hortons, the Dave Smiths prior to this, and all of that stuff. We've brought them in. I'm telling you, I'm talking to a lot more influencers and all the time now, and entrepreneurs who are coming in. So I think we have, and I think it's just going to be a matter of time for, you know, that to play out and them to influence their audiences. And, you know, we've got a lot to do. Maj Toure is at work, hard at work recruiting for the party. You know, there's just a lot of this stuff that's going on right now.
How, you know, I'm looking at a January 6th post from the LP national account, and it's a shot of Adam Kinzinger and a couple of cops who were involved in the January 6th protests. And it says, grown men who cry like little babies on national TV over a protest shouldn't be ruling over you. This was sent to me by a couple of high-profile libertarians who were like, you know, this makes me want to leave the libertarian movement, not the party. I mean, how do you assess that kind of backlash? Or, you know, I think about, you know, there's one thing I think we all agree. I mean, certainly on this call that the United States should not be involved in Ukraine, certainly not in any kind of direct military capacity, but even, you know, giving aid and things like that. How does making a statement saying the U.S. should not be involved in Ukraine comport with a lot of LP National and Mises Caucus or affiliated people who are like, Zelensky is a welfare queen, Zelensky is a neo-Nazi, Zelensky is this? Like, do you ever, like, how do you work to discipline your messaging so that you are not like needlessly alienating people who agree with you? And they might be that, you know, January 6th is full of shit. But then it's another thing to kind of make a message that is mocking, you know, people who are, you know, serious in their comportment and whatnot.
Zelensky came into our country, waved his country's flags, and got our politicians to give him billions of dollars, and then is seen on luxurious boats and all of this stuff. Right. And he also was at first willing to negotiate, you know, a ceasefire, and allowed himself to be turned by Boris Johnson. So I don't think Zelensky, what are we supposed to revere Zelensky?
No, I'm not saying we're supposed to revere Zelensky. If the internal politics or the external politics of Ukraine don't matter to us, why foreground Zelensky as opposed to Putin?
Because
why not foreground Putin in exactly the same terms you're talking about? And this is where I'm asking as a strategy issue. I'm not asking why you would legitimate it or why you would, rationalize it. But it's like, you know, for the same reason that, like, that's the question to me.
Because American policy has nothing to do with Putin. It isn't aiding him. We have no control over that. But we do have control in our ability to fund this war, to keep having people die so that Ukraine can be used in this geopolitical agenda to weaken Russia for the strength of globalism, like, and all of this crap. Like, that's the only thing that we have control over. What am I going to do? Shake my fist and say, Putin, back off? I mean, yeah, in principle, he should.
Maybe it's that the proper, you know, because again, the Republican Party or certain aspects of the Republican Party are already attacking Zelensky.
Yeah, but Zelensky deserves to be attacked
in exactly the terms you are. No, our government deserves to be attacked, right?
Yeah, sure. But Zelensky,
but
Zelensky turned down peace.
Comes here with the hands.
But Zelensky turned down peace.
Yeah,
and he did that on behalf of Western geopolitical interests.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
no, but again, my question is the strategy of you're trying to appeal to Americans, right? Who are going to join the libertarian movement, and the question was, how do you go from how do you not needlessly alienate people who would be like, you know what, we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine, but I'm not sure that I want to be involved with people who personalize this and talk about, you know, Zelensky as a neo-Nazi, Zelensky as this or that, any more than they find it reprehensible when people say Russia's not all bad, but then they actually, you know, embrace Putin as the last gasp of.
But it's not like it's new for America to be funding really fucked up groups. I mean, how many terrorist groups in the Middle East did we fund and train? You know, or what are we supposed to just ignore that we're doing this righteous crusade and the narrative is that Zelensky is this freedom fighter and he's shutting down religions and all of this stuff? Like, as again, that's what our policy is tied up in. Our policy is not tied up in Putin. We're kind of limited in what we can do narratively.
Well, the issue that I've seen with some of the messaging around foreign policy is the shift that has happened, because the previous Libertarian Party was also pretty strictly non-interventionist, principled non-interventionists, but there would be expressions of, solidarity with people who are, fighting for their freedom, whether it's in Hong Kong or trying to keep their liberties in Taiwan, or Russia did invade Ukraine and try to march all the way to Kyiv. So the idea that you can be against an intervention but still have empathy for the people who are, fighting for their lives and their liberty, that seems to have been lost in the mix to some degree. Is that fair? Is that a fair reading?
I don't think so. I mean, because I think it's pretty empathetic.
Where are the Mises Caucus? Where are the Mises Caucus tweets supporting the people of Ukraine for their self-determination?
I think by getting us out of there, it is that, because I think this war would have been ended at this point if we weren't pumping this money. I think a lot less people would be dying if we weren't keeping it going so that they could have this geopolitical agenda to weaken Russia at the expense of all these Ukrainian lives. What's more empathetic than that?
What is like a tweet that would say the people of Ukraine have a right to fight for their own, lives, but not with U.S. dollars, as opposed to, the types of tweet. I mean,
right. But again, what caused, yes, he invaded, and that is totally fucked up. So, but at the same time, we have to look at all the provocations and all the nuances. My
question is not about this specific stuff. And it's also like at the LP, Angela McArdle, you may have said something like this, that to show support or solidarity with the people of Hong Kong or the people of Taiwan is to engage in CIA talking points. My question is, that kind of rhetoric, are you comfortable or are you confident that will yield more supporters in America than it will alienate?
Again, I think we have to tell the truth and we have to look for the right people. Okay. So I don't know what it means to needlessly divide, because I'm a big proponent of the fact, and it is a fact, that the power of the state that we talk about is
that if you say Taiwan should not be invaded by China, then you're a dupe of the CIA. I mean,
I wouldn't go that. Yeah, right. I wouldn't go that far. But what I would say is that the nature of the power that is exerted over us, while yes, at root is raw power.
We're talking about.
Hang on, let me finish. I would say the number one method of control that is exerted over us is psychological and therefore narrative. And then they use the fact that we are social animals to then enforce that narrative so they can do whatever they want and it's okay. And nobody pushes back. And we have to be very careful about their use of language and recognizing these patterns and push back against that. That's the extent to which we have, one of the major ways that we have to be involved in the culture war is how language is being used as neologisms to push their agenda. And that's what's
okay. And so to assert the international, the border, the national border integrity of Ukraine is ultimately to be doing Klaus Schwab's bidding. Well, you know what, we don't need to go on. I'm just saying though that this, a lot of people raise questions, and I think it's legitimate to say, the rhetoric that you're employing in order to achieve these goals, which we share, certainly in the case of Ukraine, how do you factor in, and it's not about truth because we're talking about rhetoric and narrative here. How do you count up how many people that might bring in, that are good, and how many people that might alienate, and that's bad?
I think that question cuts both ways. How do you do it? Because
well, I know that okay.
What I know is that since the takeover, the social media engagement has gone way up, and that is not a end in and of itself. I get that, that has to be used to recruit people. But I'm telling you, me personally, our social media is also way up, and I'm now getting more and more entrepreneurs and things like that I've ever had in my inbox wanting to talk to me. My days are filled with phone calls to these people. Okay. So
the metrics for figuring out, because it's one thing a lot of people want to call you or they want to bend your ear, but it's going to be the number of party members, the number of donations,
right,
and the number of elected officials.
Right, and I think there's still some ways to go in terms of programs. You know what I mean? Right now, the party has been inundated with basically cleaning up the fires that were lit on the way out. So like, what are the incentive programs? You know, I don't think we've gotten to that yet.
Yeah.
Like membership incentive programs. What's the membership recruitment drive campaign? I don't think we've gotten to that yet. You know, these things all do have to happen. Yeah.
I lost this question, but somebody was asking, oh, here it is. Related, Dylan Griffin, how much involvement does the Mises Caucus have in controlling the social media content of state affiliates?
Zero.
So that one problematic state affiliate out there is not a Mises Caucus branded affiliate. Okay.
I mean, the people who became the leadership there, you know, they were our guys. But again, as I said in our original interview, while I might not agree with every tweet, I also think that it worked for them, that they tripled their membership. And I also think there's a way of handling things. You know, people, we're all engaged in politics, and I'm not going to sit here and flog people publicly and then say, hey, you know, please volunteer. That's just not how it works in a professional volunteer organization. You know, I think you talk to people privately.
I mean, there is like, you know, putting out tweets of, you know, Meghan McCain crying at her dad's funeral and joking about, that's just another example of kind of this like weird lack of empathy that I don't think like reflects well on libertarians as a whole.
Empathy
like,
for who?
Oh, for Meghan
McCain?
Yes, Meghan McCain's losing her father. I mean, as a human being, that is.
I don't have empathy for Meghan McCain. Why should I?
Because you're a human being,
Michael.
Yeah, but again,
but you're in political communication. So if you don't have sympathy,
how are we supposed to express our rage at these problems? Where is that? Where is the valve for that?
Yeah,
because I will say that one is about the farthest edge that I'm willing to. And that was our conversation.
This is the edgelord conundrum, then, right? Because you want to create a world that's full of empathy and whatnot, but if you do it in that way,
libertarianism is not about empathy per se.
Okay. Yeah,
it's not. It's about property rights. Now there's an element of tolerance, but it's about property rights and free association and the right of you to control your property. Would
you say if you have, you know, say the most outrageous thing that you want to say that right now that will help catapult again, because this is strategic. Communication is strategic. It's not about truth per se. Like your ideas, your philosophy, your goals are rooted in truth. But is that the truth? You know, that it's a good thing to mock people who are crying at their father's funeral.
I personally wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't have done it. Okay. But I also get it. Because again, where is the expression of outrage at these warmongers, these murderers in our society? How are we supposed to express that? Politely?
You know what? That doesn't actually get to, you know, that I doubt that turned anybody into less of a warmonger. You know, so
I think it started a conversation. You know, I think it
did not start a conversation about foreign policy. It started a conversation about the LP of New Hampshire and the way it is undercutting or affecting the ability of libertarians to gain more ground in cultural discussions and political discussions.
Yeah, I would say, you know, empathy and just, you know, basic human civility, it does seem like an important part of politics. And I would argue empathy is an aspect of libertarian philosophy as well, but that's a little far afield. The thing that I was wanted to say about, you know, what Nick was raising is this idea that, you know, there's the meme out there of like, I'm for the current thing. And what I worry about is that the Libertarian Party is turning into the
there's a danger of
the inverse of that at times of I'm the against the current thing. Like that is equally.
You can't be purely reactionary. Absolutely.
Yes, it's a reflexive contrarianism that is not. It's just by definition not going to be correct very often, and it's going to tarnish libertarian ideas, because libertarian ideas are, you know, meant to analyze things in a very specific, like reason-based way instead of kind of being reactive. Is that?
No, I think that's right. I think we can't be purely reactionary, because then you can just be led around the nose. You got to be smarter than that. But again, that's one state affiliate, and they're running their experiment. And I think, you know, we'll see what happens at their next convention. I think we'll see what happens.
I mean, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the Ukraine conversation. It kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like a lot of people were feeling supportive of Ukraine. And so the Libertarian Party's stance was, well, we have to be like as anti-Ukraine as possible. Some of that has leaked in to like vaccine discourse and so forth. It's concerning to people who are trying to look at things and, you know, reason through them on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're speaking to a lot of people that are furious at the situation where, you know, our prices are going up constantly, and, you know, they're angry, and there has to be a positive channel for that anger. I don't think politics is characterized by empathy right now. And I think that's why our job is to abolish the state, because who's the one driving up the prices? Who's the one spending our money on these other countries when we're falling apart? You know what I mean? Like, it's,
you know,
that's why I don't respect Meghan McCain and all these people who would destroy our future.
I do think that what might be reflected in this conversation is actually a kind of communication strategy aimed at the remnant versus aimed at kind of politically homeless people or something like that. That reflects to some degree the Mises Caucus strategy versus a kind of Reason magazine strategy. But let's can we talk about Ron Paul and Rand Paul, because they come up in the document, and I think that's a really interesting, you know, kind of thing to talk about, and you know what sets your strategy apart, Michael, from if not previous LP things, but it helps clarify it. Can we talk about Zach? Do you have the slide about Rand Paul?
I don't have a.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. So just
summarize what it is. It's that Ron Paul is, you know, a Republican, but more he kind of transcends the Republican Party in a way that Rand Paul doesn't. You can kind of expand on that idea, Mike, if you would.
Sure. Well, first of all, I reject the notion that Ron Paul is a Republican per se. Like, I think libertarianism is a philosophy before it's a political party. And once we're getting into political parties, you're just kind of talking strategy. I think he, at the time that he was running, and perhaps a lesson that he learned from 1988 is that you get more attention if you're running as a Republican. And I think that's been true for a long time. And I think that was kind of an animating factor of why libertarians should run as Republican and we should try to take over the Republican Party. But I also think, as we discussed earlier in this conversation, that the media paradigm has radically shifted to where in the long term, that is no longer serving our interests. You know, I think it's hard to argue that Ron Paul didn't have an explosion in people reading Bastiat and thinking about libertarianism. However, we now have the opportunity to get our ideas on the Tim Pools and the Joe Rogans and the Lex Friedmans and all of this stuff to form our own narrative about ourselves, where we don't have to kind of make these concessions in order to try to have a shot at getting attention. And that's where I think the kind of parable of Ron Paul and Rand Paul comes in. In my heart of hearts, I do think Rand Paul is a libertarian. I just think he's playing a fundamentally different game than Ron Paul ever played. But I think because Ron Paul was always seen as a libertarian in Republican clothing, and because he was able to buck them the way that he did, that he was able to have a cultural movement that transcended, you know, his inability to pass bills. Whereas Rand Paul is playing a political game, and you'll see even Republicans who say, well, he's like Trump. You know, I don't believe he's like Trump, but that doesn't matter. At this point, we're talking perception. And I think that's because he has wrapped himself up in the culture and the narrative of the GOP. And that's what we now have to escape to form our own language and paradigm. And yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, when we spoke last spring in Reno, you said that your politics come from Ron Paul. Just can you describe, like, how old are you, and was it the Ron Paul campaign in 2008 that activated you into politics? Or talk a little bit about how he came to be, you know, he came on your radar screen and kind of energized your political worldview.
Yeah, so I'm 33 years old. So I was about 18, 19 at the time of you know, that first race. Very different world back then. You know, my family had a computer in the living room that we all shared with a dial-up internet. So,
Yeah.
I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have, these groups and these communities that we have now. It was basically
Your
just,
parents are not super political or anything like that, I assume.
no,
Yeah.
not super political. But essentially one of my best friends showed me these clips of Ron Paul, and yeah, that's what activated me. And I would say made me a actual libertarian and started going down that path. Essentially 2012 came around. We decided we've got to do something. And I actually have videos of this where the very first time I went out to the Federal Reserve building in Philadelphia, just me and my friend, and started bullhorning the First Amendment Center about all these Federal Reserve talking points that I picked up from Ron Paul, and kept doing things like that. And then came on the radar of a meetup group, an activist group in Philly called Truth, Freedom, Prosperity. About 40 of them came out. I found, holy shit, there really is this underground world. And then I just never looked back.
Yeah. What was it about Ron Paul that appealed to you so strongly? And I
His
mean, you're not
courage.
alone. There's no question. Ron Paul, I started at Reason in 1993. And I'd say, at that point, if you ask people why did they become a libertarian, it was primarily, Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, maybe Robert Heinlein, maybe Reason, a couple of other things. But, there's no question since 2008 on, like Ron Paul is, one of the major feeders, if not the major feeder.
His courage. It's as simple as that. It's his courage. His willingness to buck the Republican Party, to buck the audience he might be in front of, and get booed to tell the truth. I mean, that I would have to say that's the core of it. Going into South Carolina and making the case for heroin is a pretty tough sell. And then to get them to cheer is a friggin' miracle.
Right. And he also, I mean, you're talking about that moment when he was asked at a presidential debate, would you legalize heroin? And he said, yes, like, I'm not going to use it if it's legal. Would you? And it brought the House down. He also was willing in front of military or military leaning audiences to actually critique American foreign policy in a way that has really never been heard of at the national level from an elected congressman, really, since like maybe the 30s. But
right, exactly. All of that stuff. I mean, of course, I was animated by the freedom philosophy and the beauty of the ideas and all of that stuff. But on a more personal, deeper level beyond political philosophy, the courage.
Yeah. At the risk of reopening the past conversation, though, Ron Paul, the one thing that is amazing about him as an individual is like, there are people around him, there's the newsletters in the past, et cetera. But when he was on the national stage, from really in the 21st century on, you never heard, he's the opposite of a troll, right? He never spoke poorly of anybody in front of him, et cetera. And I mean, is that part of his appeal that he
I think so, and I know where you're going with that. But I also think that we're in a different time. I also think that the libertarian movement, and especially people within the Mises sphere, are much younger. And so I would, I would say go back and look at 1988 Ron Paul, where he basically said, there was one guy who was basically saying, we have to have the government enforce morality in terms of drug use. And I mean, he didn't use these words, but he essentially said, well, maybe the government should put your fat ass on a diet. You know what I mean? Like, and so, I think we got Ron Paul, the grandfather, and maybe not Ron Paul, the beast athlete from back in the day.
That was from the Morton Downey Jr. show. If anyone's going to look for that on YouTube, which was like the kind of like forerunner to like Jerry Springer in a way, but with a slightly more intellectual edge to it.
I don't think that,
especially when he said he would puke on him, that was very intellectual.
Going to say that, Morton Downey Jr. and intellectualism have never been seen in the same room, Zach. But and I'll also just point out very quickly that Ron Paul also was able to hit home runs in congressional baseball games while burdened by the rainbow Astros uniform of the 70s and early 80s. So that's
a
different planet. You also, if I may, you had said you got your politics from Ron Paul, your philosophy from Jordan Peterson. What do you mean by that? And what do you take from Jordan Peterson? And are your personal preferences somehow wrapped up in the project of the Mises Caucus?
So what I mean by that is I think it's important to set the table when it comes to Jordan Peterson, because I find that people come into understanding Jordan Peterson from all these different angles. You know, like there might be people who didn't follow him in 2017 who came in on his comments of like, oh, this fat chick on the cover of this magazine is not beautiful. You know what I mean? But I think a lot of people that came into Jordan Peterson came in with nothing having to do with politics at all. I think they came in through his Bible lectures. That's certainly where I came in. And those Bible lectures are not political. I mean, he might have the off comment here about how, you know, if this philosopher said that religion is the opiate of the masses, communism is the methamphetamine of the masses. You know, he might have little things about that.
And then Herod is obviously he would have been part of AOC's posse, things like that.
Things like that. But I would say the core of if I had to give a bumper sticker message for what Jordan Peterson's internationally cultural phenomenon that around him from that 2016 to 2019 period was, if I could put a bumper sticker on that, it would be voluntarily adopt as much responsibility as you can in your life. And if you do that, that will imbue your life with the meaning necessary to, carry yourself through the dark times. And those dark times will come as a matter of, human existence, as a matter of human existence.
So you like his interest in archetypes and in a kind of tradition.
Yes. I think essentially, just the same way that Ron Paul was this figure that got all these young people reading Bastiat and Mises and Hayek and Rothbard. I think Jordan Peterson was the same thing for Carl Jung and Carl Rogers and Solzhenitsyn and Nietzsche and all these different thinkers that have a lot to say. It's not political per se, but I do think that there's overlap, because what is liberty if not taking maximal responsibility for our lives? And I think there's a beauty to that. And I think I think just as much as the state, we have a serious problem with nihilism in our culture and in our society. And we have got to fight back about that.
How do you define nihilism?
Hopelessness, not seeing the meaning in things, thinking, just thinking that there's no purpose. But people don't act that premise out. They act as if they're aimed at a goal. That's the whole point of human action, that we're goal oriented. And perhaps you could say that the highest of all goals is divine. Whether that exists as a supernatural reality or not is irrelevant. It's the thing that guides us. And basically we form an ideal of ourselves that we would like to be, and then are judged by that ideal in our striving towards it. And that causes us to reflect on ourselves and change and aim at the ultimate good. And I think we've lost connection with concepts like these. And I think he has helped people to understand them and to pull themselves out. I mean, go and look at those lectures. I was going to kill myself. I was addicted to drugs. I didn't talk to my father for 5 years. The amount of good that came out of that is and frankly, I think it was the best social movement that happened since Ron Paul. And I think there's a lot to learn from it. If he can become an international cultural phenomenon off a core message of responsibility, we can fucking do it with libertarianism.
Yeah. Is that something that you think has been missing from the Libertarian Party's message? Is that, the message of personal responsibility and like strong, I mean, libertarians are all individualists, but it's really that's kind of it's a transcendent message. It transcends politics. But is that something that you think there should be more emphasis on politically, or is that outside the scope of politics?
Oh yeah, because there's this kind of paradoxical relationship with freedom, where freedom and responsibility, where freedom is taking full responsibility for your life, but then as you have that freedom and you pick your path in life, part of maturation is restraining it's self-government. It's restraining your own freedom and kind of locking off blocking all of the other paths to focus in on the things that imbue your life with meaning or advance your life or advance your family's life. And that's why responsibility is, we have to be able to take that responsibility for ourselves. We can't have that imposed upon us by the state. And I think this is the level where libertarian is missing, is that we're all ideas and no narrative, no story. And I think by telling a story about, no, freedom is taking ultimate responsibility for our life so that we can imbue our lives with the most meaning possible. I think that can absolutely animate people.
Is there a tension between, somebody like Robert Nozick, the philosopher, talked about a utopia of utopias, and he kind of talked about a minimal state, if that, a night watchman state, if necessary, would be, would be there to allow people to kind of do their own thing as much as possible and then minimize friction points. But when you say that, if you have a vision of freedom that is, say it's a Christian community which follows very traditional social and sexual rules and things like that, and that's there, and then somebody next door to them is living a very libertine, Playboy Mansion lifestyle. Is that, is libertarian able to contain that kind of framework, or does it kind of trend towards a single morality under the banner of truth, that this is the best way to live?
I think that's for the individual. I think, again, it's like something I said earlier, where libertarianism is not a full scale or a full form worldview. It's a political and legal theory. I do think that there are certain ideas that would, like a basic respect for property rights, that's kind of got to be there, like to maintain a libertarian society. But again, we're social animals. Another thing I love about Jordan Peterson is he helped me to revolutionize how important the First Amendment and free speech is. It's not just our ability to say what we want and speak truth to power and all that kind of stuff. It's a divine principle for how we can disseminate reality and disseminate what works and what does not work. So the kind of thing that you're getting at has got to all play out in the social marketplace. Maybe it is the case that if you live a libertine lifestyle, especially into your 30s and beyond, and you're breaking people's hearts, and maybe there is a relationship between that and people becoming bitter and resentful and then not living the best life that they can. Maybe there is, but is that for the state? Of course not. But this is why we have to build up organic leaders.
Are you a religious person?
People are going to hate my answer for this.
Not really.
I'm not religious. I'm spiritual.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned, that property rights is really just a basic respect for property rights is kind of the thing that all libertarians can agree on. I think that something like that is probably right. But it does make me wonder, like, what is the relationship that you see between libertarianism and like decentralism? Because this project is called Project Decentralized, and it's like, what is like, how far down does the decentralization go, and like, what are you willing to compromise from a libertarian perspective to achieve decentralization? I guess a simpler way to put it is, can you decentralize into authoritarianism? Because you can imagine breaking free of some of the diktats of the federal government, but then you're stuck with a state government that's actually worse from a libertarian perspective than is the federal government, because at least we have, the Bill of Rights protecting us at this point. So like, what if a state, if a state broke away and it decided really property rights are not sacrosanct, eminent domain on steroids is what goes here. Is that a danger of being too dogmatic about decentralization?
Mises himself would tell you, if this right of self-determination could apply to every individual, it must be so. Okay. So again, it goes back to an earlier part of the conversation. You aim for the ideal, and again, this is a principle that's outlined in Rothbard's article, "The Case for Radical Idealism," and it can be summed up as: you aim for the ideal, and along the way, you take what you can get, but you always aim at that ideal. I would argue that when you say, like, okay, let's say you decentralize, and a state secedes, could it be worse from a libertarian perspective, than the federal government broke away from? I got to be honest. I understand what you're going there. Like, some bad things could happen at a state by state level. I've never seen a state government starve 80% of Yemen to death. I don't think they're capable of doing that. I've never seen a state government drop nuclear bombs on Japan before. I don't think they're capable of doing that.
What about
I'm not saying they're angels.
The American military, that's the big, evil that you're hoping to abolish here. I can understand that perspective. However, domestically, you can imagine states that would strip away all Second Amendment rights. You can imagine ones that would strip away First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights, due process. All these things are like states are constantly trying to do this, and pretty much the only thing that stops them is, constitutional challenges. I had a little bit of
state governments have constitutions just the same as the federal government. And what is it doing for the federal government? You know what I mean? Like, we still have state. I mean, my state, we have a stronger Second Amendment than the federal Constitution.
In terms of decentralization, though, would say with gun rights, because this is playing out in certain states that are trying to devolve gun rights, certain types of gun right decisions to the local level, would it be okay if a local town said, you know what, we are absolutely going gun free. We are giving the police an absolute monopoly on force, and we're going to go house by house, and and you guys opted in, you're living here, you voted for us, who voted for this? Are you in favor of decentralization even when the the outcome is anti-libertarian, as most people would define it?
I would say I'm not in favor of illiberal policy ever. But I do think that a problem like that, like gun control, it's better if it's isolated to one state than it is the whole friggin' country. So you always have to put up that fight. But I would say you see a lot more hope on a state by state level than you ever do from the feds. The feds just conspired with the NIH and all the big corporations to essentially socially coerce this vaccine. And there's all sorts of problems associated with that now. Whereas even in New York, which is like a illiberal hellscape, had the court decision to reverse their gun stuff. Right. So there's always going to be this tension between liberalism in the classical sense and illiberalism. But the question is where does the fight become more manageable? A federal government that is trending ever more towards supranational, international government, or at the state level and down and down and down?
Well, it varies, right? Because it depends, because there were various speech rights that were enforced ultimately by the federal government, certain civil rights. I mean, if you were black in the South and you wanted to go to a good public school, you were fucked until the feds, or an equally bad, public school, the feds did play a role there. So, two quick things, and then we're going to wrap up. But first,
can I ask you one question on that front?
Yeah.
Would you say that the federal government is a net rights protector or a net rights violator?
Yeah, I think that's the wrong way to look at it, in the same way that states and local governments are. The way that we win, we are kind of like, Clint Eastwood in, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You're constantly working one government against another government, against another government, against people, in order to get the biggest sphere of individual rights and autonomy. So on certain levels, the federal government has been great. On certain levels, state governments have been great. And then sometimes you have third sector groups like the Catholic Church, which in one place could be totally repressive, and in another can be an agent of freedom and liberation. So,
last comment. I will say this just to kind of set the table on this. I am an opportunist. We don't have a lot of avenues available to us. So while we got the feds, if I can get a good outcome with it, then fuck it. I mean, I'm aimed at decentralization, but we're under a lot of duress, and
decentralization is a tool, not an end in itself.
I would agree with that. The goal is more liberty. I just think that it's much easier to fight for liberalism when it's your city council.
Just to go back to Jordan Peterson briefly, you said that you like the connoisseur of a fine band, an underground band that became popular. You like his early work. What happened in 2019 and his kind of his journey, which may or may not be indicative of everybody who kind of believes his thought, but he is now working, for on the Daily Wire. He is a conservative pundit. It's has he become less interesting? Why has he become less interesting?
I think so. In terms of his politics, what he would identify with and has publicly identified with, he calls himself a classical liberal. He specifically says, I'm a British classical liberal. So I don't think he's the worst guy in the world. I also think that he has shown a huge willingness to change in the face of new data. I mean, I personally handed the guy a copy of Choice by Bob Murphy. Next thing you know, he's having Safadina Moose and Bob Murphy on the show saying, I'm interested in the Austrian school. You know, he took the vaccine and then basically said, hey, I took the vaccine and now the state won't leave me alone. What the fuck? So I think, you know, I think he's his own man. Now in terms of your question, I'm not nearly as interested in his political commentary as archetype, myth, meaning, narrative, neurochemistry, and all of this kind of stuff. And I suspect that what he's going to find over time is the stuff that a lot of his audience came to him for, because it imbued their life with meaning, and that they're not interested in more politics.
Thank you. Zach?
There's one question here that maybe we can finish up on. Amanda Gibbs, can Michael tell us about his classes at the Mises Institute? So this is your chance to plug, Mike, on our way out.
Well, I don't have classes at the Mises Institute. I attended Mises University, and I think everybody should. Mises University was an absolutely fantastic experience. Okay,
maybe we can talk about whatever candidate training that the Mises Caucus. That might be what she's asking about. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I'll just say for the record that we're not formally associated with the Mises Institute. We all just love them. But yeah, runislibertarian.com. If you are interested in running for office, we'll give you the training no matter what you're running for. But we will try to get you to run for local office because we think that's the most viable. But yeah, runislibertarian.com. That's where we're funneling all the candidates and connecting them to our organizers for on the ground support, connecting them to training. Right now at a clip of twice a month. And then we're also going to be doing in-person training at our Take Human Action Tour events.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Anything else, Nick, before we get out of here?
Can we just to try and throw one more log on the fire? Do you have you've talked about the need to radically decentralize to sub-county level races, but there's also a role for national races and people running for offices. I know that you've said in the past that Dave Smith and Maj Touré would be the ideal LP ticket in 2024. Do you still believe that? And if so, make the pitch.
I 100% believe that because I think the two of them combined especially are in positions that nobody else in the liberty movement is in. I think, Dave has been on Dr. Drew. I haven't never seen any other libertarian on there. He's forming relationships with Pat David. He's forming relationships with Tucker Carlson. He's friends with Joe Rogan. He's been on with Megyn Kelly. They love him over at Tin Pool. He's on Kennedy. He's on Greg Gutfeld. He is just on more platforms and in front of more people, effectively giving the message by a large margin than anybody else in the movement. I don't really think that's up for debate. So I think he has the ability to speak to the most people and get them excited about our ideas and be in that funnel. Likewise, I think Maj Touré has a huge platform and legitimacy to crowds that we just don't have access to. He's shouted out by a track in a track by name by Royce da 5'9", who is a major rapper, has done duo albums with Eminem. You know what I mean? Like he's done debates with Lupe Fiasco. And another thing that Maj brings to the table is that it's one thing for libertarians to be, let's say, principally good on an issue and to be seen as legitimate in the eyes of the people who care about that issue. So for example, it's one thing for us to be Second Amendment absolutists and to speak that principle. It's another thing for Maj Touré to be respected by all of the gun trainers around the country and the ammo producers around the country and Colia Noir and, all of these people. It's not just the ideas, it's the legitimacy. It's one thing to be interviewed by Joe Rogan. It's another thing to be interviewed by Joe Rogan, who is your friend and colleague in comedy, where there's this transference of legitimacy. And I think that when you put the two of those together, we can reach tens of millions of people and effectively at that. And I think that's going to flood us with the most number of people and get as many people, have the most political capital that we've ever had, and start nullifying and having these pockets of resistance around the country.
The criticism that comes to mind there is that, and you say this explicitly in the document, that we got to kind of get rid of this idea that we're in it to win it, that we have any shot whatsoever. It just makes us sound like crazy and delusional. That's always what the Libertarian Party candidate has traditionally said, is like, I've got a shot at this.
Actually, Harry Browne kind of initiated that in his book Why Government Doesn't Work in '96. Said that explicitly, as well as an interview to me at Reason at the time. But before that, they usually said we are running informational campaigns.
Let me give you an example of something in this realm that I thought was very eye-opening. And apparently I'm the only one who saw this. I've never heard anyone else mention this moment. But when Justin Amash dipped his toe into the presidential race in 2020, he got a Bill Maher interview. And that's great. In that interview, like, I think it was right at the outset, Bill Maher asked him, so what are you doing? Do you think you can win this race? And Amash said something to the effect of like, well, yeah, of course I'm running. I don't think if I didn't think I could win, I wouldn't be running, something like that. And Bill Maher laughed at him. He laughed at him and basically said, yeah, well, you guys come around every 4 years. You always have a story and it always sounds the same. I really think he's speaking to how normal people do. And I think we've got to embrace the fact that the role of these races is different than winning. I think we have to embrace the fact that we are just pitching a different paradigm and we're being a thorn in their side and fuck these people. And, I really think that we've got to just embrace what the role of that is. And it ain't winning. Not yet.
What is the value proposition for anybody to cast a ballot for somebody who is like, I'm not even, this is not really a serious candidacy?
There isn't one right now. And I think we have to be honest about that. We don't. I mean, why would they? If they know that we're not going to win and they see Team A as being more dangerous than Team B and they have to defend themselves from that, we don't, basically the only value add that we have is changing the paradigm. And I mean, what to you guys is the value of it? I think
I guess what is because there's a lot of time and money that is spent, getting on ballots and so forth. So what really would be the point of that if your objective is not really to win votes?
I mean, I think we can incorporate that. We got to say, listen, if you love these ideas, if you want to be a thorn in these side, give us your vote. We want you on the ballot, or we want to be on the ballot to cause this trouble and to disrupt. But we're not going to win, and nobody thinks we're going to win.
Sounds kind of like Gary Johnson in 2016.
I would say it was more 2012 Gary Johnson, who was a lot better.
We're going to wrap up. This has been a lot of fun and it's been very long. I think this is our longest live stream to date, Zach. Does that check out? So thank you, Michael.
It flew right by though.
I want to do a quick shout out to GMM for his $5 donation in question. Michael Heise.
Bring that up. Should we bring that up just since he threw in $5?
All right. Yeah.
Is Michael familiar with Edwin Vieira's proposal that each state legalize gold and silver in order to undermine the Fed?
I am, and legislation to do just that, sample legislation to do just that is available on the 10th Amendment Center's website, and then you also have the Missouri Freedom Coalition, who is working to do exactly that. I totally think that's something we should do, and I think Bitcoin should be in that conversation as well.
Okay, let's leave it here. Michael Heise of the Mises Caucus. Thanks for talking to Reason, and we'll see you around.
Thanks, guys. TakeHumanAction.com.